I shall start, and I shall start pretty much in medias res. On the 19th of September 2006, the former Director of General Investigations for the Police of Buenos Aires, Miguel Osvaldo Echecolatz, addressed his concluding remarks of the accused to the judges of the oral court in the First Federal Court of La Plata. Standing still, defiant and unrepentant, Echecolatz quoted his compatriot writer Jorge Luis Borges. Quote, "As Borges would say, you are not the judge. The supreme judge would judge us after death." His voice resonated in the tense silence of the courtroom, and it was these words that would be given prominence in the late evening and the next day editions of major Argentinian newspapers. At this point, Echecolatz had already been tried for illegal arrest and torture in 1983, receiving a 23-year prison sentence, but was subsequently released under Argentina's notorious amnesty laws. Triggered by the growing evidence of Echecolatz's direct involvement in the murder, torture, and illegal deprivation of freedom of a group of disappeared, his 2006 trial was the first public retrial of those amnestied since the repeal of the full-stop law and law of due obedience by the Supreme Court of Argentina in 2005, as well as the first in the series of penal causes delivered by the Trial for Truth that was recently established. Having heard his final remarks, the judges sojourned and returned to deliver an unprecedented sentence. Echecolatz was imprisoned for life for what was legally defined for the first time in Argentina as crimes against humanity, committed under the framework of a systematic plan of extermination or genocide. Astonishingly, Echecolatz's literary remarks struck neither the judges nor the audience as extraordinary on that September day. And they were not. Echecolatz was simply using, or rather blatantly misappropriating, that inspiring and unsettling proximity between literature and law, of which recent critical discussions are more than aware. In his discussion of testimony provided before the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Mark Sanders described the relationship between literature and law as one of interdependence, where law, in order to be law, engages with cultural explanation, linguistic idiom, and even literary form. Yet Maria Aristidemou has insisted that this relationship is also oppositional. Literature, she writes, presents a site of struggle, where the discourse of law, as it manifests itself at a specific historical moment, may be contested or confronted. More specifically to this case, though, Echecolatz also invoked a figure that had had a close, if complicated, relationship with the military regime whose governance between 1976 and 1983 and the use of clandestine state terrorism for the kidnapping, torture, and death of an estimated 30,000 people was under public and judicial scrutiny. Outspokenly right-wing, Borges had been known as an acquaintance and supporter of Jorge Rafael Videla. In stark contrast to these dubitable credentials, the aged Borges, then émigré, also attended as a witness the 1985 junta trials. He gave a humanely outraged interview to Diario del Juicio, the ephemeral newspaper dedicated exclusively to covering the trial, and memorably described the experience of the session in his characteristically ironic language in an essay entitled Monday, 22nd of July, 1985, published in Clarion on July 23rd, 1985. In this expressive account of the trial, read by a vast number of Argentinians, assumedly also by Echecolatz, an 85-year-old Borges made clear the parameters of both his own unorthodox ethical philosophy and his ultimate conviction in some inalienable rights and concomitant responsibilities. Quote Borges, "Personally, I do not believe in free will. Neither do I believe in punishments or rewards. I do not believe in hell or heaven. However, not to judge and not to condemn this crime would mean to foster impunity and to become, in a sense, an accomplice." This statement, deprived of the writer's signature irony and projected still a characteristically Borgesian vision of the world, amounted to both a personal recognition of accountability and a more general statement on historical obligations of workers in culture. In a conspicuous contrast to the way in which his words would be used by Echecolas more than 20 years later, Borges here acknowledged and reinforced the credibility of the court and the proceedings. Now, this constellation of events of the 1970s, 1980s, and 2000s, in which mass violation of human rights, judiciary proceedings, and creative practice surprisingly converged, illuminates well the complex interaction of the arts and transitional justice, and the complex roles that art and art-related practices play in societies in transition. These roles, their meanings, and their heuristic values for the field of transitional justice are the subject of my talk today. I would like to start, however, by briefly reminding you of some key categories I will be using. The label transition is generally attached to societies that transit from a totalitarian regime or conflict where mass atrocities and violation of human rights have taken place, to a more pluralistic type of governance and peaceful and just society. I hesitate to call it democracy because it's not actually something that is a universal definitional category. So, transiting from one state of relatively monologic voicing to another state of more pluralistic and thus more just voicing. The questions of justice figure prominently in transitional periods, and they are integrally linked to the society's dual effort to, on the one hand, come to terms with the legacy of large-scale past abuse and bring justice to the past through redistribution and recognition, and on the other hand, to ensure the continued practice of fairness in the future. And this is the cross-disciplinary arena of transitional justice, a very interdisciplinary discipline, if you can put it that way, in which I got very much invested in the past couple of years. In relation to this field, the UN has repeatedly highlighted that in order to properly address the root causes of conflicts or past political abuses, it is necessary also to tackle violations of economic, social, and cultural rights. This view is reliant on an experientially supported assumption that culture, including art practices and art heritage, vitally contributes to building just societies. So, how do we start this inquiry? Well, probably by drawing to a more general statement about symbolic practices. A recognition that symbolic practices like art production are a means to express the nomos, that set of social narratives and interactions that, according to Robert Cover, locates and constitutes any legal system, and to give observable, emotionally compelling form to the demands of the nomos. Following on Patrick Lenta's observations on South African literature and law, one may infer a few observable types of interaction between the arts and transitional justice in expressing this nomos. First, representation of and engagement with justice and injustice, trials, legal proceedings, punishments, and so on. Second, memorial, the use of the arts to remember and commemorate. Third, the intrinsic or adopted artistic underpinning of law, so performative nature of law and lawmaking practices by themselves, and regulation and protection of the arts by international domestic law and law enforcing practices. How do we protect artists? In any of these cases, the arts establish a particular rapport with law and justice-related practices in a society, a relationship that, as we have seen in the Borges example, is one of both interdependence and opposition, or rather supplementarity. For art, I quote from Thomas, may draw attention to inequities committed by law's exclusion, and that's, to me, the most significant function of art, so as a supplement to law. The arts operation tends critically to expose the commensurabilities and disparities between the general reading of the rule of law and its local perception, and the external and internal practices in place to promote legality in a given community. So what we mean by these big pamphlets and slogans and how it actually feels on the ground. That's the field of arts in between these two. The arts, and here I think about arts across high and popular divide, and arts in their plurality, so literature, visual arts, music, theatre, dance, architecture, and other art forms. They present both a crucial catalyst mechanism and an important information and reparation tool to support societies in transition. But their actual functioning in a transitional context is very complicated. In relation to their operation in societies in transition, I suggest the following. This is really an operational division of the arts into those that function in the open, popular music, certain types of performance, theatre, public space interventions, architecture, monumental art, and those whose reception tends to unfold in the enclosed or intimate public spheres, literature, occasionally film and visual arts. In addition, works of art can have an impact which unfolds over lengthy periods of time, and literature is the best example here probably, or can operate, or architecture, or can operate most forcefully in limited time spans, and here we have drama and performance, site-specific performances. Finally, the works of art play a complex role as both a decisive contributor to and an impeder of social political recalibration of society through this complicated interaction of operations. So it's not that we have only operation of one art form. Anecdotal evidence says that a transitional society would have its preferred art form for voicing this pattern of recalibration of society, but generally the arts work in conjunction. So what do art practices do then in transitional context? First, they assist recognition of past injustices, their memorialization and psychological reparation, and testify to the social challenges of transition, measuring satisfaction and evaluating the transitional processes. So they provide very important unofficial counterparts for truth-finding, reconciliation, civic repair and psychological reparation, lustration, public apology, and other mechanisms of transitional justice. Their ameliorative function, so therapy-based function, is also very important and very often assessed, but I wouldn't like to linger on it. I mean, I think we all by now know that art can be a powerful therapy in healing society and healing individuals within that society, especially in the context of a division of communities, a fear of cohabitation, and so on. Now, what is quintessential to all these functions, however, is this address to this particularly charged relationship with the past that transitional societies have, and the effort of transitional justice to find this path between too much memory and too much forgetting. So finding the right balance between memory and forgetting is crucial for any society faced with transitional changes. It is in identifying and traversing that precise path that function of the arts in transitional societies is paramount. Artworks, on the one hand, document atrocities committed by abusive regimes in ways and with emotional impact that are unavailable to both governmental policymakers and non-governmental organizations. In fact, scholars and artists alike frequently insist on just such a function of arts in a transitional setting. The production and reception of art affords one with a unique opportunity to engage historical trauma at the level of a cathartic public action and under relatively protected circumstances of creative activities. So you guise it in creative activities, but what you're effectively doing is a very important recalibration, reworking of a certain deep historical trauma. In this respect, the role of performative arts in achieving rights such as freedom of expression, equal treatment before the law, rights of assembly and franchise, and the cultural rights of remembering and forging collective identities is particularly important. And we all know examples of community-based theatre that deploys participatory exercises and games. These are the exercises and games where members of the affected community assume protagonist roles of perpetrators, victims, discuss the problems and propose solutions without having solutions proposed to them by experts, so trying to work on the grassroots solution and decision making. And that has provided really unique opportunities for sharing the conflict or state abuse related experiences in a number of transitional settings, including Argentina, Burundi, Peru, South Africa, former Yugoslavia, and others. At the same time, the operation of many transitional justice mechanism is in itself performative, as I hinted, and the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission's live public hearings self-consciously presented themselves as an important public ritual and a national theatre, as it were. And while some have criticized such blending of law and affect rhythm medium for impeding due process and resulting in unfair trials, when introduced with purpose and caution, such practices are extremely valuable. And I'll give you but one example. A few days before she was scheduled to testify, a witness before the Special Court for Sierra Leone had asked the witness and victim section of the Office of the Prosecutor for permission to perform, in front of the court staff, a play she had created and written together with other witnesses. She was given permission. In this precedent-making decision, the Special Court for Sierra Leone acknowledged that past experiences can sometimes be more fully and more accurately represented by artistic performance than in a traditional courtroom testimony. So they asked her to testify through traditional courtroom testimony, but also to perform her play in front of the court. In an interview after the court performance and the court testimony, so both of these, the witness compared the two experiences. And this is what she says, paraphrasing. During their testimony, the court was able to hear the experience, whereas the play enabled the witness and other witnesses to perform it, to enable the court to see the experience, thus relaying some less easily expressible or inexpressible content. The witness in question was a victim of mass war rape. In addition, while in the courtroom, each witness would speak for himself or herself. In the context of a play, participants were able to present their stories simultaneously, to interact, and the participants were both perpetrators and victims. That's a really crucial point about this play. And thus they were able to also show to the court and to themselves how different elements of their respective experiences are interlinked and how you can move forward. Not to be missed in this account is another property of art making in a transitional justice setting in or beyond the court. Art production can provide a public platform to restore the dignity of individuals and groups, offering acts of moral and symbolic reparation, and enabling the participants to revision themselves and their role in both local and wider communities. This function is intrinsically related to the well-recorded power of the arts to shape and reshape personal and group identities and create new identities. In societies in transition, such processes involve reckoning with issues of accountability, responsibility, reconciliation, and a sense of justice, general and specific, as well as projective thinking about the destiny of a nation and or the artist as a member of that nation. And we all know that art making assists creative thinking, and what I'm suggesting here is that it is vital in projective thinking, which is absolutely necessary, not only in transitional setting. The uninhibited art production is particularly relevant for what has recently become known as transformative reparations or reparative justice. Those are judicial and non-judicial measures and practices of repairing society that aim at transforming or challenging the structures that brought about a conflict or violation of human rights in the first place, rather than just mending the situation on the ground. You work on the structural injustices or disbalances. And typically for this kind of operation, an artist would take up an issue in contemporary transitional societies and its legal provision to reflect on some persistent pattern of structural injustices. Now, what you see on screen is one of the artifacts from an art exhibition I curated a few years ago, and it's a work called Identification by the Guatemalan Dominican artist David Perez Carmadavis. Now, for this performance, Carmadavis contracted a tattoo artist to tattoo the name and identity number on the inner lower arms of those who were interested, also volunteers. He just fished for people in Guatemala City. And the purpose of it, as he explained to the people who were tattooed, was that if they disappeared, or they be buried without being identified, they would be means to identify them. The result was a series of close-up photographs of tattooed inner arms, and this is Karma Davis's own tattoo that I'm sharing with you. Now, for anyone who knows body art and participatory art interventions, this is a familiar territory. It's an affiliate of a range of artistic practices, using the insight that body may operate, as Judith Butler said, a nodal point or a nexus for reflection of juridical or productive power. But Karma Davis's intervention has also a very site-specific target, which is collusion between state and non-state actors in a preposterous delay to identify the victims of murder or disappearance in transitional Guatemala, in contemporary Guatemala. And that's set against a specific historical background, the aftermath of Guatemalan civil war, in which an estimated 200,000 people were killed and about 40,000 people disappeared, mostly of indigenous Mayan population. Now, what Karma Davis photographed as identificatory tattoos intimate then that a state which fails to provide a reasonable environment and efficient procedures for the identification of murder and kidnapping victims is just like the one that perpetrates and covers up forced disappearances, and just like the one that places people in concentration camps. And I hope you didn't miss the reference, visual reference here. As this example demonstrates, the operation of the arts in transitional societies is inextricably linked to our capacity to generate, to mobilize, to energize what I could call creative vigilance, moral imagination. That's Lederach's term for that. I prefer to call it creative vigilance. This is perhaps the key function of the arts in general, in my humble opinion, but particularly so in transitional settings, because it is able through practices such as these to engage multiple temporalities, to talk about contemporary and past issues, as well as to project by virtue of energizing this creative vigilance. And it is in this way that artworks like identification can be jurisgenerative and serve as potent transformative agents in a transitional society. Now, like Borges earlier, Karma Davis now lives in diaspora. Now, artists working in exile or diaspora often emphatically engage with the transitional processes in their home region. Yet their position and symbolic status are ambiguous, and their artistic efforts to assist the work of transition are frequently greeted with animosity by the artists and public in the transitional country itself. They are accused of escape or of losing touch with the realities of the ground, as well as of perpetuating the calls for remembrance at the expense of a focus on economic and social development. At the same time, and precisely because of the ambivalence of their status, the diasporic artists' voices resonate forcefully in transitional settings. Such has been the case of, for example, writers such as Dubravka Ugrešić and Slavenka Drakulić, two of Croatian female intellectuals labeled witches in the 1990s and thereafter self-exiled, as well as of Serbian-Montenegrin artist Marina Abramović. In the context which includes reckoning with the legacy of ethnic cleansing, heightened visibility of certain types of crimes such as war, rape, and need for structural changes, especially in the domain of gender relations, their unsettling fictional, essayistic, and artistic encounters with the past mass atrocities and transitional realities in the region of former Yugoslavia, and this is a clip from Abramović's video installation, Balkan erotic epic, Banging the Skull, provoked heated debates at home, not the least because the public allegations of these female artists, both during and after the conflict, included the charge of insensitivity to war rape. So what are they doing? Why are they doing that? Well, precisely unsettling, surfacing the persistent patterns of gender stereotyping, media, and sometimes art community itself, would then pitch their own alternatives For instance, Croatian writer Ivana Simić Bodrožić, Serbian playwright Biljana Srbljanović, or artist Šela Kamarić. Those who live at home whilst visiting diaspora, they would pitch them against these female artists in diaspora. So the diasporic artists say, okay, do it, and show that you are still embedded in the same structural misbalances, the same structural problems. Of course, it is more complicated than that, because it is, first of all, unjust to artists on either side to compare them in this context. So the last two examples also exemplify that far from having an unequivocally positive function, the arts are amenable to both use and abuse in transitional context. In post-genocide Rwanda, for example, theatre has been widely used to reimagine national identity through government-sanctioned theatre companies and projects of rewriting history, so community-based theatre. Ananda Breed has researched on community-based theatre in Rwanda, and she found that Rwanda's grassroots literary and theatre associations like the Poetry of Rwanda successfully bring people together and reconcile perpetrators and survivors, but that they also perform nationalism, and quoting from Breed here, through a strategic use of slogans promoting the government's concept of Rwanda as one unified culture with the same solitary language, which is everything but true on the ground. Such situation bifurcates the operation of performances themselves. Although they may contribute to individual cases of reconciliation, they also create dilemmas that impede large scale of general reconciliation. Now, some investigations of this kind have been fruitfully extended to the form that embodies restored behavior in a particularly direct way, that's music. And I would kindly ask Darcy to help me with playing this particular clip. This is Carlos Falconi, Viva la Patria. This is in Quechua language. Hopefully will.
Takichum takisai, wihichu wihiyai. Takichum takisai, wihichu wihiyai. Warmachakunapa, yawichayampi, chiknikuy juntatin, takichum takisai. Warmachakunapa, yawichayampi, chiknikuy juntatin, takichum takisai, wihichu wihiyai. Pinchos viudaya, kusiri kung manchu. Kangallo viuda, kusiri kung manchu. Alku pachurinta, unancha yang manchu. Bimara kutinja, sapampaloma, purusa chahina, manapiniyu. Si pilla waktimpas, hatal di busarmi. Chakita wiptipti, saya libusani makicaya kita haywa limuyawai uthay mi pulinay hamya malindia wamangal alma qatalila susi bagay tahanar kang kutas radio itahan apan kutas concha tu madre newan kutas viva la patria newan kutas viva la patria newan kutas bagay tahanar kang kutas radio itahan apan kutas concha tu madre newan kutas viva la patria newan kutas viva la patria newan kutas.
Now, this art can operate most powerfully, as you can imagine, in societies where literacy rates are low and where song making and oral expression have been a powerful lever of social transformation and the relay of historical truths. Through its capacity to speak to wide audiences and disseminate messages both via live performances and nowadays mass media, songwriting has commended itself to be a very important way of literary and performative expression in transitional negotiation of history. Now, writing about the complementary roles and discourses of the Peruvian Truth Commission and the Canción Social Ayacuchana, this is a Ayacuchan social song, and Carlos Falconi is one of its most prominent singer-songwriters. So writing about it, Jonathan Ritter has pointed out that the discourses of the law, which is informative, and popular song, which is commemorative, can fruitfully complement each other in the work of remembering and collecting testimonies, and this is a very powerful and moving example of it. This is a touching song, and I'm yet to find someone who has not been moved by it. Yet just like in the case of Gacacha courts, the use of song in transitional Peru is not simple. When Falconi performed a song on the occasion of the presentation of the final report of the Peruvian Truth and Reconciliation Commission to the public on an August day in 2003 on the Plaza Huamanga, city of Ayacucho, that's the city that you saw in some of these videos, and the plaza, the audience's response, however, was ambivalent. While for hundreds of elated fans, the event provided a bittersweet sense of closure for an important chapter in transitional history, for a not insignificant group of demonstrators who had marched against the Commission on that very plaza the whole afternoon, this performance marked only a beginning. Prompted by a media smear campaign, some protesters contested the conclusions of the Commission. Others yet demanded attention to occluded concerns. All these affects and emotions poured out and intermingled before the stage where Falconi performed. And I treat Falconi's song, as you have heard, as a literary form, thus belonging to the arts operating over long spans. This is actually a 1985 song, and it still resonates today. These arts have their intrinsic values, for they allow time for gradual semantic unveiling and prolonged reflection, and that's my plea for literature here. Much could be gained, for instance, by simply observing the prominence of or sudden resurgence of a genre, of a literary genre. For example, the rise of two opposite but related genres in South African literature, crime fiction and judicial autobiography. Or by heeding the simultaneous changes in literary style and rhetoric of legal decisions. Transitional poetry itself could be a very fertile ground for such explorations, and I'll just give you an example. I won't be reading it all for the fear of running out of time, but please have a read. This is written in Tetum, and it is written by Abe Barreto Soares from Timor-Leste, one of the generation of poets writing in Tetum, Indonesian and Portuguese, that could be said to exercise a hidden informal kind of accountability, or what some authors like Lipscomb called an aesthetics of accountability that is entwined with the formal pursuits of the transitional justice sector, telling the truth, recounting the wrongdoings. One of my favorite bits of this poem, though, is the interaction between the international judicial frameworks, their national manifestation, and the indigenous words, words that we cannot translate without a proper context, such as Tebe and Bidu. When we come together, we will pray, we will sing the songs of ancestors, we will Tebe, we will Bidu, circling the stones of the sacred house. So this is flourish everlasting, but such writing you can find in a variety of other settings, in South Africa as Nadine Gordimer, in Argentina as Tonuna Mercado, and in many other instances which confirm that literature not only provides alternative testimonies and ways of memorizing, but also deconstructs law, suggesting other possibilities for law, other means of expression of law, and more profoundly, conceptions of value and justice that draw upon a wider variety of gender, sexuality, ethnicity, linguistic diversity, and lifestyle. In my publications on the subject and in this talk, I have argued, however, that in order to honor the complexity and significance of the relationship between the arts and transitional justice, one needs to engage the entirety of types and modes of operation of the arts and diverse and variable roles an artwork can play in a transitional context. And I have deliberately argued for as wide cultural perspective as possible. Not that I'm expert in all of these cultures and languages, but I'm fishing for your help here. Surely there must be people in the audience who may be more familiar with some of the transitional justice settings that are emerging or they have been important in the past. So if you are such a person, if you're interested in this very rapidly evolving field, please let me know. I'm very happy to collaborate. And it's only such a diversified cultural perspective that can liberate us for the actual appreciation of the role of arts in relationship to law. On my side, I'll just close with a set of categories, which I have more fully explored in an article on the arts and transitional justice, categories of questions, really, which we need to pose. So this is really a very much evolving field, and a field that needs categorizations. So these are kinds of questions that you may wish to pose to yourself if you want to engage with this field. First of all, questions concerning the operation of the arts. What recognized and unrecognized function do the arts have in transitional societies? Then questions of representations and making sense of justice. Then who creates art and what art? And then very importantly, preservation and maintenance of record of artistic engagement with transitional processes, which is a very complicated issue, fraught with difficulties and vulnerabilities of various kinds. So much fraught that I dedicated 3 pages to it. I'm certain that those interested in these questions will easily come up with further complexities, further examples that both compound and invigorate what I have said today. On my side, however, I would like to conclude with a very simple question. Why does it all matter? It matters, I argue, because the arts work with and develop symbolic forms crucial for our understanding of who we are, what our place in society is, who we might be, and what society could be. The consideration of how humans and symbolizing creatures both shape development of and give form to justice is one of the key questions, key inquiries for the 21st century, and one whose urgency we have just begun to realize. Thank you.